The consensus narrative is a kinetic misdirection. Media fixates on locked and loaded rhetoric and drone strikes in border regions. This is threat inflation designed for public consumption, focusing on visible, high-cost assets. The real vector is not a missile launch. It is the weaponization of silence. The global financial and military apparatus runs on a nervous system of undersea fiber optic cables. While rising cyber attacks are documented, the primary vulnerability is physical. CSIS analysis confirms that severing a few key data corridors can trigger a systemic data blackout, halting trillions in daily transactions. The strategic objective is not to defeat the superpower in a kinetic exchange. It is to engineer a blind Leviathan scenario. By severing subsea cables or blinding satellite constellations, an asymmetric actor cripples the host's capacity for command and control. The target is not the warship. It is the data stream that guides it. A blinded superpower cannot project force, manage its markets, or maintain social cohesion. It is an apex predator rendered deaf and sightless, collapsing under its own systemic weight. This does not lead to a battle. It leads to a solvency crisis. The kinetic cost is bypassed entirely, replaced by cascading financial liability. The primary motive is never conquest. It is survival. A state facing a terminal solvency crisis, where domestic liabilities exceed its capacity to pay, does not simply collapse. It exports the crisis. This is a mathematical certainty. The objective shifts from winning a war to externalizing its own insolvency, forcing its adversaries to absorb the catastrophic financial liability. Consider Russia. CSIS analysis frames the conflict not as a war of choice, but a solvency crisis made kinetic. Facing crushing domestic liabilities from an unpopular war, the conventional military model becomes unsustainable. The state apparatus itself becomes the primary liability. The pivot to asymmetry is not a strategic preference. It is a function of economic weakness. This weakness mandates a new vector of attack. Why spend billions on a bomber when a low-cost drone can achieve a similar economic effect? Reports from the Times of India confirm drone strikes in Russian border regions. This is the blueprint in action, imposing disproportionate defensive costs and cascading liabilities on a superior economic power. It's a launch-on-warning protocol for national bankruptcy. The goal is not to defeat an army, but to trigger a liquidity crisis in the markets that fund that army. By engineering systemic risk through a death-by-a-thousand-cut strategy, a weaker actor forces a superpower into a zero-sum choice. Engage in a massively expensive kinetic conflict it cannot afford, or face national insolvency. The battlefield is the balance sheet. The central mechanism for engineering systemic risk is the inversion of the cost of violence. This is the money shot. According to analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, the cost-to-kill ratio has been fractured. A $5 million main battle tank, a primary kinetic asset, is now a liability, vulnerable to a $500 first-person view drone. The math is not theoretical. Drone strikes in Russian border regions confirm the blueprint is active. This is the democratization of violence. The term is clinical, not political. It signifies the collapse of the financial barrier to entry for projecting lethal, strategic force. For a superpower, this creates an impossible economic equation, defending against an infinite number of low-cost threats with a finite number of high-cost assets. Every defensive action drains national solvency. The objective is not to win a battle, but to impose cascading financial liabilities until the target system defaults. The field of engagement is no longer a declared war zone. It is a distributed network of gray zones, economic and political vacuums engineered for experimentation. Drone strikes in Russian border regions are not isolated events. They are live fire tests of low-cost vectors. According to analysts at CSIS, the rising tide of Chinese cyber attacks is not random hostility. It is the systemic degradation of command and control infrastructure, a protocol for imposing cost. Regional instability, from a Venezuela crisis impacting gold prices to internal political fractures inside Western nations, serves a single purpose. They are staging grounds. Here, the blueprints for economic attrition are perfected. The objective is to create a state of perpetual crisis, baiting the target into a launch-on-warning posture. A locked and loaded declaration is not strength. It is the sound of the trap springing. Every carrier group deployed, every alert activated, is a cascading liability on a national balance sheet already past its breaking point. These gray zones are not battlefield for territory. They are laboratories for insolvency. The goal is not to win a war. It is to trigger a systemic solvency crisis from 10,000 miles away. The launch-on-warning protocol is a mathematical trap left over from the Cold War. It is a rigid, automated response system designed to launch a full-scale, retaliatory strike upon detection of an inbound enemy launch before the first warhead impacts. The decision window is not days or hours. It is minutes. According to analysts at CSIS, this doctrine removes human deliberation in favor of systemic speed, creating a structural vulnerability. This vulnerability is now the primary target. An adversary does not need to build 1,000 ICBMs. They need only to blind the system that detects them. A report from Taiwan's National Security Bureau confirms that Chinese cyber attacks are rising. The vector is no longer kinetic. It is digital. The objective is to create sensor paralysis, to neutralize satellite and ground-based radar networks, plunging the command structure into total darkness. This creates the fog of digital war. The commander in the bunker sees nothing. Or worse, they see a spoofed signal, a ghost launch fabricated by the cyber attack. The protocol, however, remains active. The choice is binary and immediate. Trust the dead screens and risk decapitation, or follow the protocol and initiate a global kinetic event based on a potential phantom. This is not a military dilemma. It's an engineered solvency crisis at the highest possible level. This strategy of forced escalation is already in field tests. We see low-cost vectors, like the drone strikes in Russian border regions, used to impose disproportionate kinetic and political costs. This pressure elevates the alert status, making hair-trigger rhetoric like locked and loaded a policy default. The endgame is to force a fragile superpower into a permanent state of high-cost paranoia, bleeding it of resources until it must choose between national insolvency and a war it was manipulated into starting. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction has been supplanted by mutually assured liability. State and non-state actors now understand that a superpower's center of gravity is not its military, but its financial solvency. The blueprint is visible in open source intelligence. CSIS analysis confirms that rising Chinese cyber attacks are a vector for economic disruption, not just espionage. The use of low-cost drones in Russian border regions is a tactical field test for imposing disproportionate costs. This is the new protocol: asymmetric escalation. The objective is no longer territorial conquest. It is to engineer a solvency crisis. We see market fragility as a constant. Gold and silver volatility tied to the Venezuela crisis demonstrates how financial markets are already priced for systemic shock. An adversary does not need to win a kinetic war if they can force the target to print money to cover cascading failures. Rhetoric like locked and loaded is a distraction from the real economic battlefield. Therefore, the next phase is not an invasion. It is a calibration shot, a targeted attribution impossible strike designed to measure systemic fragility. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a 72-hour shutdown of a primary U.S. liquefied natural gas (LNG) export terminal or a major container port's digital logistics network. The vector will be a logic bomb delivered via a compromised software update, officially blamed on a non-state ransomware group. The event will not trigger a kinetic military response. It is designed specifically not to. The true goal is to collect data on the speed of financial contagion, the political paralysis, and the precise dollar amount of the cascading liabilities. It is a range-finding exercise for a future, decisive strike against national solvency.